Thank you. So again, just wanted to go through some conditions. Initially, conditions for this year, as of for 2020, from January through about the 20th of August. This is a graph showing you salinities at the 5 of the continuous monitoring stations that the district operates in the lagoon. Up in Mosquito Lagoon, that's ML. Banana River Lagoon is BRL. In the Indian River Lagoon near Cocoa and near O'Galley, and then further south near Vero Beach. So this shows you salinities, and the red arrow kind of highlights the sort of May onset of the rains, which drove salinities down in places where you get some freshwater input. But if you look at, for example, the purple line, which is Cocoa, and around O'Galley, you don't see the same sort of changes that you see in some of these places that have freshwater inputs. You might want to hang on to that May date for when we get towards the end. Next, if you wouldn't mind. Temperatures have been going up. Summer's pretty much here everywhere in the lagoon. So we're up in the upper 80s, low 90s at most of the stations. That always leads us to wonder about what's going to happen with the phytoplankton, because they do enjoy the warmer weather. So next, please. And over the year, we saw blooms sort of early in the year. Those blooms were predominantly diatoms. Pseudonetia was one of the dominants in many places. You can see that was around Cocoa and in Banana River Lagoon. The middle of the year was fairly quiet, and certainly we had lots of reports about some of the clearest water people have seen in some period of time, especially, for example, Banana River Lagoon, where we've had issues for long periods of time in 2018. Recently, after the rains start, again, you can see some things begin to bloom. So again, we see Pseudonetia, which is the diatom, that tended to be more dominant near the southern end, and Pyridinium came on a little bit more strongly up in the northern part of the lagoon, Cocoa and so forth. Pyridinium being the dinoflagellate that gives you the bioluminescence. And then fairly recently, there have been reports of what are called nanoplankton, which are much smaller phytoplanktons, and that includes potentially the brown tide. So we may again be seeing a shift as conditions stay warm and the rains push nutrients into the system. Next, please. Fortunately, dissolved oxygen stayed pretty good this year, so above 4 milligrams per liter. We started to see dips down below 2, which is where you have stress on some of the fish and other organisms, beginning sort of in mid-June, and then just recently in late August, and that's particularly up in that kind of northern Indian River Lagoon area, Cocoa and further north. And there were reports of some small fish kills in various places, which is potentially a combination of phytoplankton and some of the algae that's been in the lagoon. So Caulerpa was one of the things that seemed to take advantage of the clear water. Caulerpa is an alga that actually does attach to the bottom, and it can be mistaken for seagrasses. Our hope is that the Caulerpa stabilizes the bottom and helps the seagrass get a chance to come back. But we haven't seen any massive fish kills like we had, and that's a good thing. Next, please. So I also wanted to give you a little idea of some of the things that are going on to try to resolve the situation. And one of those that the district has been involved with is the C1 rediversion. Next, please. And what the C1 rediversion does is take water out of the C1 canal that normally would have flowed into the St. Johns River and puts it back into that watershed. So the canals that were dug brought water across the ridge that normally kept the water to the west, and this is trying to push as much of that water back as possible. So remember, there are 2 pump stations, the northern pumps and the southern pumps, that move water into a water management area where the water is treated before it gets into the St. John's system in the upper St. John's Basin. Next. This gives you an idea of how much nitrogen on the top left and phosphorus on the lower right has been moved by that pumping. So we take the amount of water that's pumped and the concentrations in samples that are taken near those pumps, and then calculate out how much diversion of nutrients we've had. So this is keeping nutrients out of the lagoon. So you can see 2019 and then 6 months of 2020. And the last one here just shows you that, you know, the pumping depends on the conditions, as not only the conditions of the pumps and so forth, but the rainfall. So again, if you remember back in May 2020, the rains started, and so June there was more pumping than there had been in 2020. So this is a process that's ongoing and helps to keep nutrients out of the lagoon. And I think that's it.
If anyone has any questions for Chuck Jacoby, feel free to submit them again in your questions window. And we can share those with the group and see if we can make Chuck's day challenging today. I don't see any questions right now for Chuck, but feel free to submit them as we proceed with the meeting, and we can either follow up with Chuck if we have time at the end, or get back to you individually. Oh, I do see one question here. It's from Patty Gertenbach, Chuck. Going back to the last slide, does the red arrow indicate a trend down?
No, the red arrow is to mark that month of May, which was when the rain started, and then the pumping increased because there was sufficient water to pump. So, you know, if we don't have rain, there's not enough water in the canal for the pumps to operate efficiently. So we need to have the water to pump. That's what that arrow shows.
Okay. There's another question. Oops, it moved on me. Let me go back up. What are the flow weighted mean TP and TN concentrations moved to the west?
I'd have to go back and do that calculation. I don't have that right off the top of my head, but I'm happy to do that, and I'll make sure that it gets to the DEP folks. Okay,
thank you, Chuck. Another question.
I just mentioned while I'm still babbling on here, that the 2019 seagrass maps showed us that we're at about 42% of the maximum seagrass that was recorded which was in 2007. So someone had asked about recovery, and we are not seeing extensive recovery.
Okay. This question is from Eric Charest in Indian River County. How much water was moved west to account for the nutrient reductions shown in the presentation?
Oh, let me see if I can find that spreadsheet quickly. Just go ahead and maybe carry on, and I'll have that by the end. How's that?
Okay. And another question. It says there's been this is Roy Laughlin, there's been a dense and persistent algal bloom off Cocoa and Rockledge. Is that represented in your slides? He says the water's been cloudy all summer, but the bloom seems to be killing fish in some areas.
Yeah, that showed up in the chlorophyll for sure. And yes, that has been one of the more problematic areas recently. Okay. And there were dips in oxygen in that region. So. Okay.
I guess he's talking about a bloom that's really been happening in the past few weeks. Your data didn't come all the way up to today, did it?
Those data went up to the 20th.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. So pretty recent. Okay. And there's a question, is the diversion doing any reclamation?
I'm not quite sure what reclamation
means?
I guess.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it does, the water does assist the St. Johns River in the sense that that's, the river normally would have received that water. So it is kind of doing two things, taking water and nutrients out of the lagoon, which would not have been there, and putting it back where it belongs.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Chuck.